Right, hello everybody, welcome back, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This video marks the beginning of topic 2, and topic 2 is called Ecosystems and Ecology, and this video will be the start of topic 2.1, Species and Populations. You can probably already see from the title, because I put the number 1, I'm expecting to do at least 2 videos on this first topic, 2.1, because I think it's fairly large. I think there's an obvious break between 2 different topics here. In this video, what I'll do is largely look at definitions, ecological definitions. And as you can see from the little box above my head, those are the keywords that I want to define in this video. Speaking of definitions, before we go any further, I think it's just worth thinking about the meaning of the term ecology. It comes from 2 Greek words, and I'm probably about to mangle the Greek language as well now. First is oikos, from which we get eco, which means home, and the second is logos, from where we get ology, meaning the study of. So therefore ecology is the study of the home, or the study of living things and where living things live. It's often confused with biology. Biology, from bios, meaning living, biology is the studying of living things. Ecology is not just biology, it's the study of the living things themselves and the place where they live, as you can get from the definition. That's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth just pointing that out before we begin. I'll go immediately to the syllabus, and for once, I'm not going to bore you by reading through word for word what the syllabus says. I've just underlined the terms that you need to know about, and basically the first part of this just gives you definitions for those terms. If you wanted to, you could stop the video here and just learn by parrot fashion the definitions that the IB give you, but I want to just go through them in a little bit more detail. I've changed the order slightly from what they give in the syllabus. The reason being is that I think that it's important to know some definitions in order to be able to give others, and I don't think the IB have been very logical in the order they've given those terms here. So these are the order of those terms that I want to go through. I want to begin with species, habitat, then population, biotic and abiotic factors. Then I want to look briefly at the idea of niche, or if you're American you would call it a niche. A niche, and there's 2 types of niche, which is called fundamental and realized. Niche is probably the most difficult one to define, by the way. And then I'll finish by looking at the ecological terms, community, and finally ecosystem. All of these things, possibly with the exception of niche, you're probably kind of familiar with, but the problem with that is we use these terms in a kind of everyday colloquial meaning in English, and they don't always mean exactly the same thing as they do in ecology, which is why we need to give quite specific definitions. Speaking of specific definitions, you are expected to know these definitions, but you don't need to know them word for word. Very often in paper 1, you're expected to give a definition, very often just 1-mark questions. You don't need to give a word for word account of what the IB tells you these things are, but it needs to be very close. Close enough that the examiner knows that you're basically giving words to the same effect of the IB definition. Okay. Well, secondly, as well, also you might be expected to, well, you are expected to give definitions sometimes in the paper 2 essay questions. You are expected, certainly in the 9-mark questions, as you know, you are expected to give some background information about the topic you're talking about, and specific definitions can be very helpful to be able to do that. But just let me emphasize, you don't need to learn these definitions word for word. Okay, let's move on quickly. First of all, we begin with the term species. Species is a biological term, species singular and species plural, by the way. You can see 2 species here. Also, I've put the Latin names, or what we call the Linnaean system names. This is obviously an African lion, and its Latin name, or Linnaean name, is Panthera leo. Its genus name is Panthera. Its species name is Leo. So species is the most specific name that you can give to a living thing. This is a Bengal tiger. Its species or its genus is Panthera, and its species name is Tigris. You can already see that these two must be closely related because they have the same genus name, which is one level above species. However, because they've got a different species name, Leo and Tigris, they do obviously belong to different species. The definition of a species is a group of organisms which are so closely related that they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. This is one species, this is another species. However, because they, like I said before, they are close related, these two can actually breed together to produce hybrids. Funny looking hybrids, actually. The first one on the top is a liger, named because its father would have been a lion and its mother a tiger. Probably guess what this one is. This one is a tigon, named for what I suspect are originally sexist principles, named because its father in this case would have been a tiger and its mother a lion. You might think that I've just contradicted myself by saying that they can interbreed when they're different species, but these two hybrids are sterile. They're not fertile or viable offspring. So therefore we can still say that the lion and the tiger belong to two separate species. In order to produce a hybrid, the two separate species must be very, very closely related, as they are in this case. Right, let's move swiftly on. Habitat. Habitat is a geographical area in which you find an ecosystem. Basically, the ecologists themselves give the boundary to what they're talking about in terms of habitat. So you can define any habitat as long as you put a boundary around it. It's a geographical area. You can have collections of habitats that are very similar, and together they would form a biome, which we'll look at separately later on in the course. Population. This is a term that's probably used incorrectly a lot of the time, certainly in terms of ecology. A population is a number of individuals of a defined species of a single defined in a single defined habitat at a single defined time. So as you can see here, these sets represent three separate populations: population of yellowbird, population of redbird, and a population of bluebird. And because they've been put in these separate sets, they also belong to separate habitats, or of a defined habitat. Okay, biotic factors. Biotic factors are interactions between living things in an ecosystem. So we can define 5 ways that living things interact with each other. They can interact in terms of competition. That could be between species for places to live or for food resources. It could be within a species, perhaps for mates, competition for mates. The second interaction here, second biotic factor, would be predation and herbivory. Obviously, the feeding relationships depending on whether you're talking about carnivores or herbivores. Number 3, parasitism. Well, I guess you all know examples of parasites. Parasites are living things that live on or within another species to the detriment of its host. So it's never good to have a parasite living in or on you. Mutualism is a similar relationship between species where they live together, but in this case it's for the benefit of both. I won't look at examples of these because we'll look at specific examples in the second video. But mutualism, or sometimes called symbiosis, is when living things live together for the benefit of both. And then finally, disease. Disease is never desirable, but it's basically a similar relationship with microorganisms to the detriment of the host organism. Okay, so those are biotic factors or biotic interactions. Abiotic, you might already have realised, non-living interactions as opposed to biotic. So it's the non-living components or the non-living interactions with an ecosystem. They're basically things in the environment that you can measure that can have an effect on living things. So I do include things that are like temperature, amount of sunlight, pH, salinity maybe, amount of rainfall or precipitation. You might be able to come up with more, for example, the amount of slope of a piece of land. All those things that you can measure but are non-living would be called abiotic factors or abiotic interactions. Next, this is possibly the most difficult to define. For that reason, we'll spend at least one lesson talking about this and trying to come up with a more rounded idea of what it means. The definition that's generally given, the general textbook definition, is that a niche is the role of a species within an ecosystem and its position within that ecosystem, within the ecosystem. The word niche, or niche if you prefer, I believe comes from a medieval term. A niche was basically a hole in a wall in a monastery where a monk would live and sleep. I was almost going to say where a monk kept their possessions as well there, but I'm not sure how many orders of monks were actually allowed to have possessions. So it's a nice kind of mental image. It's this kind of position on the wall or the position within an ecosystem. Role is a reasonable idea, I think, but don't use the term job. It would be very incorrect to say that a living thing has a job, a defined job, an pre-existing job within an ecosystem. That would be incorrect. The fundamental niche would be the largest niche that a species could occupy if it wasn't affected by biotic factors, like we said before, disease, predation, herbivory, all of those things. Basically, all of those biotic factors act on a niche to decrease its size. And you can't have a situation where two species occupy the same niche. We'll talk about that in detail later. So the fundamental niche would be the largest possible niche. The realized niche is the actual niche that species can occupy. It is an oversimplification, but here you can see niche of 3 different species, the same birds we saw before. I say it's an oversimplification because it looks here as if niche is being defined as the space or the volume in space that each of those species are able to occupy. That's true to an extent, but a niche is actually more than that, as we'll try and look at in the separate lessons. Okay, moving on. Just to complete this, one term you need to be able to define is community. It's another term that we use probably wrongly in everyday language or colloquial language. In terms of ecology, a community is all of the living things within a habitat at one point in time. All of the living things and all of the living interactions, biotic factors, in one place at one time. So community does not include non-living things, all of the abiotic factors we said before, all of the rocks and things that they live in. It only includes the living things and their biotic factors. And then finally, this technically wasn't on the syllabus that I showed you before, but I think it would be quite strange to continue talking about topic 2, ecosystems and ecology, without at the outset talking about a little bit about what an ecosystem is. So you know what a system is from topic 1, and we know that the word eco comes from the Greek oikos, meaning home, the place where living things live. So therefore we can define an ecosystem as all of the living things and all of the non-living things, all of the biotic and abiotic factors within a self-supporting system. Don't know if you heard that, but I think that's a good. I think it's a signal for me to finish. All right, so thanks for your attention, everybody. Please go back through these again. Just before I finish, I think it's worth me just repeating what those terms are that I'd like you to be able to have a definition for. It will be species, habitat, population, biotic and abiotic factors, niche, both fundamental and realized niche, community and ecosystem. Okay, I will speak in the classroom with you. Hope that made sense. Take care and see you soon.